Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's so nice to be here at the conference organized by the AI for People Association. I'm Luca, a PhD student in philosophy and cognitive science, and as your moderator, my job this afternoon is to introduce and set for this distinguished panel of experts on AI ethics. We are going to start presenting based on how I see people arranged on my screen. So let's start with Marta, a doctoral student at the Oxford Internet Institute in Information, Communication and Social Science, and a co-founder and the chairwoman at AI for People. Her research revolves around the use of data-driven risk assessment tools in the criminal justice systems. Go on with Connor, a philosophy student at the University of Exeter and AI ethics researcher at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. Connor currently working on the relationship between anthropomorphism and AI, and his main passion lies in the form of the cross-section between the sub-Saharan African philosophy of Ubuntu and AI. Maza, business development manager and AI enthusiast at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute and co-president of McGill Business Review. She wrote a beginner's guide for AI ethics to help people navigate this complicated and interdisciplinary topic. You can find it online, and I definitely recommend reading it. And last, Gabriele, head of AI research at the AI for People, doctoral student in data science and computation. His main research interests are in artificial intelligence and machine learning, particularly generative models and continuous learning via deep models. Now, before we begin, let me explain the rule of the game. The two associations will have 5 to 10 minutes to tell us how they approach topics related to artificial intelligence ethics, after which I will give the green light to the discussion. You will be free to confront and ask questions each other, while I will be free to interrupt, both to guide the conversation and to ask questions from the audience. To begin, I will give the floor to the Montreal AI Ethics Institute, and please, the stage is yours.
Thanks so much, Luca. So I think Connor will be sharing his screen. We just have a few slides to go over what we're doing at May.
Awesome, we should be all good. Let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much, Connor. So as Luca mentioned, I'm Massa, Business Development Manager, and here with Connor, Partnership Manager at the Montreal AI Ethics Institute. So essentially what we do at May is we're trying to democratize AI ethics literacy, and we really want to equip people to take action when it comes to AI ethics. So our community comes from a range of different backgrounds, whether it be computer science, law, philosophy, business. And currently we have over 5,650 members and tons of events, which Connor will elaborate on later on. So if we take a look at our audience and kind of what their makeup looks like, we have the majority coming from civil society and industry. And then we also do have some from academia and from government as well. So if we dive a bit deeper into the kind of what we do, we have kind of a two-pronged approach. We have creating content and building community. So for creating content, we have our weekly newsletter. And our goal with this is really to summarize all the developments and research that go on in the AI ethics space. So we hope to save people potential hours of scrolling through academic journals and newspapers, and really just summarize it. 20 minutes it takes to read every week. And we have subscribers from different organizations like Microsoft, IBM, Partnership on AI, and of course, different universities like MIT and Harvard. Now, if we take a look at the next aspect of creating content, we have our quarterly State of AI Ethics report. So essentially, what we're doing is we're gathering all of those research summaries that were created over that quarter and kind of categorizing them into themes as well. So for example, we had themes on creativity, environment, and geopolitics in our last quarterly report. In addition to those summaries, we also like to highlight community-nominated scholars and practitioners, kind of in an effort to further democratize access and marginalized voices in the field. And typically, we also like to have a panel discussion along with the report, kind of to make it more engaging and bring those words to life as well. So now I'll pass it on to Connor, who will touch on the other things that we do at May.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Massa. And to build on what Massa has mentioned is basically when we create content, it is for our community. So one of the main reasons that we do this is, as we say, to democratize AI. And our main channel for doing this is the learning community. So here we look to combine both the learning and communication that we so love at May in a series of intellectually stimulating discussions over a span of 8 weeks. So I took charge of this process, at least helped out with it. And effectively, we had an 8-week cohort of 15 to 16 experts and some non-experts as well from different fields, from different walks of life, from different parts of the world to create a really international, diverse, and interdisciplinary discussion, which was a fantastic event to be a part of and something that really encapsulated what May is trying to do. And we discussed issues like bias, privacy, disinformation, and accountability. And we got all of that and bundled it into a 100-page report, which you can see and is available on our website. And that was really what we at May are all about, and something that we would like to carry on as well. And something that these roundtables help us to do as well is to be able to engage with the community and to be able to get closer with our goal as well. And another way we sort of channel that is not only these types of events, but also the events that we hold ourselves. So we have our May meetups, which are basically open to all people from all backgrounds and experience levels, where we use a flipped classroom model. The participants do the readings before showing up to the event, and then are split into groups to discuss. And this is run by me and also organized by myself as well. And then we try and reconvene to share our findings towards the end with a bit of a larger group. And we aim to try and produce a write-up afterwards as well to have that on our website. And then we've done all sorts of interesting events. The ones listed here are some of our most successful ones. And then we've also done some on one that's close to my heart as well, is that AI ethics in Africa. And then we've also done some interesting events in terms of the kinds of discussions that we have, such as the environmental impacts of AI. So at May, we're all about creating content, but we're about creating content for our community as well. So I'm glad that Massa and I can share the space with you guys today.
Thank you so much. I imagine the audience already wants to ask you some question, and do I? But let's give the floor to the I4 people first. So please.
Hi, everyone. So I thought about doing the same. Let me share my screen. Okay. Let me know if you can see it. Oh, good. Okay, perfect. So thank you so much, Montreal AI Ethics Institute and Connor and Massa. I'm also happy already to see that there are many ways in which some of our projects or focus can be similar to yours as well as there are some differences, but anything that I think it's nice to share thoughts on later on when we open the floor for discussion. So I thought about spending literally 1 minute just outlining what AI for People is, but then really spend most of the time going into what we do within the realm of AI ethics more specifically. So just a general overview. When you go on our website, the first thing that comes to you is that our mission is to learn, pose questions, and take initiatives on how AI can be used for the social good. Now, that's a very general statement, which I think we need to contextualize, but also to just render more practical and more concrete in what I'm going to present to you today. We have, in terms of projects, a host of different projects. I think the best way to see that is just to see the most recent ones, and one being the conference that is being organized now. We're going to have a podcast very soon, and we have also a repository of educational resources on AI coming up. We have a host of past projects also that can be seen on our website over here by clicking on projects. It's very interesting to learn also about Connor background because we had in the past one project about like different cultural views on AI. which was mapping cross-cultural visions on artificial intelligence. So that's just to provide to the audience a sort of starting point to learn more about AI for people. But I think one thing that really I want to stress as a bridge to go then into the AI ethics of AI sort of projects that we have is that we really tend among all the different projects that we have to narrow the gap between what is the public, that is why we are called AI for people, and what are AI practitioners, which I think it's very important in an age where the development of AI and together with the knowledge necessary to basically understand what AI does are basically developing at such a fast pace that sometimes creates a very important and dangerous distance with what the public is. But having said that, let me just show you what we have been up to in terms of AI ethics. So when you go on our page, our first effort on AI ethics was to try to patch together a sort of a set of AI principles, which was a sort of summary of most of the AI principles that have been published so far, which we learned there are something like 80 in the last 5 years, or by now even more. So we basically mapped the most general ones that we found through some of the literature reviews, such as Jobin et al., that were identifying the most common AI principles in general in most of the policy documents on AI ethics. And in order to make them more concrete for the public, we not only displayed them, but if you are curious about them, you can, for example, click on one of them, get to know more what accuracy and robustness is, for example. We're going to give you a little example, a more practical one of when accuracy and robustness come into play in the real world. And then for each of the values or the principles, we link them to actual tools, such as technical tools that can be used and are open source for anyone who's an actual AI practitioner to actually try out and put into practice. And this is why this was aimed in general for both the public who doesn't know what accuracy and robustness is, but also for AI practitioners to lend together on this page. And that's it. Let's say that one of our last projects is similar to what Montreal AI Ethics Institute said as well about the literacy aspect of ethics. We put together a repository of educational resources on AI, where we basically listed any book, podcast, or any other material through which the public can sort of inform themselves on AI ethics. And we divided them according to topics. So feel free to explore that as well. And I might have already talked enough, so I will stop here. We are just now working on a repository of high-risk AI applications, but it's still in the making. So this is just the Excel sheet to have a little overview of what we are planning on doing, where we are basically researching and listing all the high-risk AI applications that we see outside there, which we encounter in articles and in papers, in order to gather them together on a single repository. That's it in terms of our AI ethics efforts. So thank you so much. And Gabri is the other collaborator here from AI for People, who will help me replying to questions.
Okay, good. I can see that you're both on the same wavelength, similar passion and interest. That's great. Let me start with a question to get just to know you. So why artificial intelligence? What prompted you to approach these topics? Feel free to answer.
Yeah, so my perspective, it's a bit of a funny story. So I'm still, for context, I'm still in my undergrad studies, and it's always been a big passion of mine has been philosophy. I absolutely loved gray areas. I've loved ethics. And then I was 17, and I went to my South African dad and I said, I want to study philosophy at uni. And he's like, well, Connor, are you going to just die with your thoughts? And I was like, potentially. And then eventually we said, okay, let's not have that happen. And we found AI, and it was a very much up and coming sort of 2017, 2018. It was very much sort of established, but not hugely deeply researched kind of area at this point. So I was basically getting on and saw this upward trend and the AI sort of ethics train that was now leaving the station. And I thought that this would be a fantastic way to do my favorite part of philosophy, which is to do applied philosophy, applied ethics, and practical ethics at that stage. So I was able to eventually find something that really interests me, produces a lot of sort of thought-provoking scenarios and also a lot of headaches. So I was able to follow my passion and to find a way that I'll be able to express it in the modern day.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Like to do philosophy is not just to pose question, but also the trying to answer to this question. So it's amazing. Gabriele, if you want to talk, that you are the only one that just not talk about you.
Yeah. Okay. So the question was about why I started studying AI, or why I started studying AI ethics, or both.
Both.
Okay.
As you prefer.
Okay. We can start why I started studying AI. I have a very technical background, both for my bachelor and my master thesis. I was in a computer science major, I don't know. I don't really like computer science. I don't really like programming. This is like I don't know. It's quite strange for guys who spend a lot of years in their life studying computer science, but yeah, I really don't like programming. I know people that are mad about knowing more about programming languages, more about how to build beautiful and very, very complex programs. But yeah, it's just not my type of of subject. I really don't like it. I think it was in 2015. A professor in my university gave a talk about generative adversarial networks. I don't know if you know this kind of model. It's a quite famous model in machine learning, and I go to the talk. I don't follow the course, but I go to the talk because I was interested in the title, basically, and I was really fascinated about. About the concept of two different models that fight against each other to find an equilibrium, and it's totally fascinated me. And I think this was the day when I started thinking, okay, I want to do this in my life. So this is why I ended up studying artificial intelligence in my master, and now I'm doing a PhD on it. So this is the start. And for AI ethics, it's maybe it's more complex. I should talk for a lot of minutes. Just to make it brief. As I said, I studied computer science and artificial intelligence for I think 5 or 6 years in university. Now I'm doing a PhD, and I didn't have any course on ethics. So I had a lot of courses on how to implement the biggest machine learning models, how to program in the most beautiful and most complex way. So very, very technical courses, very, very deep courses in the technical part. But I didn't attend. There wasn't any course about. You build this model, you build this artificial intelligence, you build this machine learning model, you do something, but okay. What if someone uses this model in an unfair way? Did you account for biases? Do you know what is bias? Do you know what is fairness and all this concept? And this question just pops up in my mind, and I don't have answer because I've never studied this concept. And fortunately, I discovered this amazing guy at AI for People. I think at the very beginning, the association was founded by a few months when I joined them, I think. And I started just by to educate myself, to teach myself at the beginning in the Iatic, so basically to answer my questions. And this is what I started.
Yeah. Probably anyone who knows what programming means doesn't like programming. That's what I think about it.
Yeah, I'm not really sure because I have a lot of friends that really like to pass hours and hours in programming.
I'm joking. Of course.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, I'm not this type of guy. Sometimes I would like to be this type of guy, because they build beautiful thing out of nowhere, amazing thing out of nowhere. But yeah, it's just not for me. I prefer to study more mathematically or more statistical sciences, or at a higher level.
Thank you, Masa. If you want, I see that you have the hands up.
Yeah. I'm not sure, Marta, if you want to go first. I know your virtual hand was raised before mine. Okay, I'll keep it short, but my background is in business. And I remember in my final year, there was this class called The Social Context of Business. And this was when I really felt like there were topics in my business degree that weren't touched upon that were just so fascinating to me. And that's when I started looking at the area of AI and AI ethics. And when I found May and joined, I realized just how multidisciplinary it is, which is extremely exciting for me. You're always learning something new. And I absolutely love how many different types of people you meet in the field, the different backgrounds that you come across, the different levels of experience. And I find that people are typically very willing to help, which is also very nice. So that's kind of what drew me to the field as a whole. And now I'm just trying to find my niche in the area of AI ethics.
Yeah, I'm agree with you. The interdisciplinarity is the real important things. We have to become interdisciplinary, because that's the only way to solve the biggest problem about the AI and other fields of knowledge. Marta?
So I have an egoistic answer and an altruistic answer, if I can say so. So my egoistic answer is, it goes back to, similar to what Connor said, a bit my path. I also studied, I studied philosophy and mathematics, and many people were telling me all the time, like, what is the link? What is the link? What is the link? And all the time I had to make up something, make up an excuse almost, I felt, until actually when I came to read more about artificial intelligence, and partly I had to take math courses, and then I started taking some computer science courses, and then I started realizing that many questions around intelligence, as Luca, you know as well, about, like, from your background, are so interdisciplinary, as you said as well, and you can reply them with philosophical sort of tools, but also with more like mathematical tools or computer science tools. So in a way, that's the egoistic part of it, because I just found it interesting, and I just found it also nice that I could continue this conversation and build a bridge between the two subjects that I've always loved. And then there's the subtly more maybe altruistic part, which is, after I was studying both of these subjects, whenever my parents, for example, would ask me about what I was studying, every time I would just start talking about maybe some things related to algorithms and the effect that algorithms have, you know, on our world and on our daily reality. And my parents would not see this at all, and they would also tell me, first, which jargon are you using? What is an algorithm, for example, and what do you mean by bias? And then, of course, this would even destroy my argument, being like, this is affecting your life, guys, because they would be like, we don't even know what you're talking about. What do you mean this is affecting our lives? So apart from my parents, I've had this also with many of my friends, and I'm sure many of you can relate as well, that it's very easy to get stuck in a bubble when you study things both in philosophy and in math or AI. So I think in that way, that's also why with AI for People, when it was funded, we stressed so much bridging the gap between what is AI practitioners or anyone who has that jargon and people instead more in the everyday sort of. So that's a bit of both.
Thank you for sharing your think about it. I noticed that all of you talk about bias, privacy, disinformation, accountability, democratization process, and we have also a question from the audience. So talk about the democratizing everything about artificial intelligence. What are the false myths you encounter most often in your outreach on artificial intelligence topics, and what are the risks instead that you feel are the most urgent to resolve? Feel free to answer in any order.
Yeah, I need to think about this. So if
Of
I
course,
want to go first.
you have time to think. If the audience want to ask some other things, just feel free to do it.
I think I can try to give it a start.
Okay, the floor is yours.
I'm not, so it's a fresh thought. Okay, so forgive me, but I was thinking that I have something which could be both of a false myth and a risk a little bit, which is, I mean, AI for people tries to work in the sphere of AI for good. And I think there has been a changing sentiment towards what AI for good is in the last years. So first there was a big positive wave towards AI for good, and we saw also that being matched with all these AI ethics guidelines that just came up. And then in the last years, I think this sentiment has started changing by several AI for good initiatives actually either being like not bringing anything to the table, or on the other hand, actually doing not good, but doing bad, you know. And I think this puzzles me a lot, and this is a bit of an open question that I think I'm trying to work through, and we're trying to work through at AI for People as well. The false myth that is now how it is being seen sometimes of AI for good that can bring with itself some risks. And what puzzles me the most, I think, and what is very urgent to tackle as a question in the AI ethics sort of field is how can we start and embark on projects that are openly for good, and how can that go wrong? Because I think we're often thinking about risks as something that comes with an intention behind it. But I think what's very interesting about AI is mostly about the sort of unintended consequences of intended actions that this brings about. And I think that's exactly what's going on in the AI for social good sphere. And that's what scares me a lot because it's so subtle.
Amazing answer. Anyone?
Yeah, I can give it a stab. And I think the way Marta sort of ended that sentence with leads sort of a nice segue into my answer is the subtlety. And I think the subtlety is one of the things that plays into what I think is one of the false myths. It's sort of being able to know what AI is and what it's currently capable of. So AI is very popular sort of buzzword at times as well, is that maybe businesses would say, we use AI and this is empowered by AI, and use that as a way to leverage some kind of response. And typically when I started my journey in the space, it was all about the Terminator robots, it was all about self-driving cars and all this kind of thing. Whereas AI is actually a lot more, as Marta rightly says, subtle, a lot more subtle. And it's something that you can, 50 years ago, a calculator was an AI, if you want to define it that way. So it's being able to, I think, to recognize what AI currently is, and then that leads to mitigating some of the risks. So the way I like to illustrate this point is looking at AI in the medical field. And I did some research in the summer of 2020 at Fairly AI. And there I looked at some regulation in terms of what was going on in the AI space and in the medical environment. And effectively, what you would have is there are FDA approved AI practices and AI applications, but they're very, very narrow. So for the audience that are very new to the space, usually you have a distinction between general AI and narrow AI. And general AI is very multi-purpose and it can do a lot of different things at a lot of different times. Whereas narrow AI is mainly focused on mainly a rigid topic, a rigid task, set rules, and there's like a right and a wrong answer effectively. And in the medical space, there was an AI sort of FDA approved product which could identify a certain disease in certain males between a certain age to a certain accuracy. So that kind of recognition that AI is this kind of can be narrow AI is that we're able to better mitigate and better able to take account of what the risks are effectively, I would say. So rather than overblowing terms, which I think is a risk that I'm finding in my work with anthropomorphism, we're able to recognize and basically account for what AI currently is and better legislate as a result.
Good point. I have a question about the healthcare bill later. If Maza and Gabriele want to add something, no?
Yeah.
Okay.
I could add something. I really agree with both Marta and Connor about the possible risk and the misunderstanding of common people about AI. Just to point out something else, I think that we have to be really cautious when we talk about AI ethics, because, as Marta said, many different organizations that tries to address the AI ethics problem are not really addressing it, but they are just saying, okay, this is bad, you can't do that. And I think it's a really simplistic point of view, because yeah, of course, just to make an example, deep fakes you can use to do terrible things, but in my opinion, the answer to the problem is not, okay, you cannot use this technology, you cannot use these models, are prohibited. If you use it, I fine you, I persecute you, and so on. Mainly because, okay, there are a lot of negative things that you can do with this model, but you can also do a lot of positive things. For example, just to make the example of deep fakes, it can be used for, I don't know, movie industries to make special effects and all this kind of positive, I would say, things. So I think, yeah, just to conclude, in my opinion, we have to be really cautious about this sort of, I would call it, I don't know, prohibitionism. So yeah, in my opinion, it's really easy to say this is wrong, you cannot do it. But in a really constructive way, and I think the really goal of AI ethics is, okay, you have this technology. Something can go wrong, something can go well, you can use it for good. Try to use it for good and not for bad. So and not prohibit everything, because I don't think it's the right way to go for ethically, I would say.
Of course, I want to address also this question, this topic. Masa, do you want to add something, or we?
I think they covered it amazingly, so we can move on to the next question.
Okay. Just to take the last topic. Yeah, when we talk about the ethics of artificial intelligence, now I am reminded of the guidelines drawn up by various countries, such as the European Union, on how ethically an artificial intelligence should be developed. And what tools do countries have to enforce these guidelines on private companies? Are we in danger of losing the geopolitical battle over artificial intelligence by adopting more stringent regulation than other countries, such as China, for example? Could we see more development of artificial intelligence tools which are risky to humans in those countries? How can we move forward in that context? Because that topic, I think, is very interesting. You can think about it. Like, don't worry to answer rapidly.
Yeah, I can go first this time, because I think it's quite related to the answer that I just gave. So, in my opinion, regulations about AI ethics, as I said, shouldn't be, okay, you cannot use this, it is avoided, this is, you cannot do it, but they could be more open to research, open to experimenting with this technology and use it for good. It's really interesting, your considerations about, well, if we enforce rules. So, for example, the European Union is preparing an act on artificial intelligence. Maybe Marta could say more about it. That try to regulate all the I don't know, the artificial intelligence development in Europe. Well, okay, yeah, the risk, I think it's here, because of course, if we put limitation on the development of AI, we are in a I would say in a we cannot compete with the countries that don't have these limitations, because only for the technical advanced. But of course, I don't want to be misunderstood on this topic.
No, you are clear.
Okay.
Don't worry.
Okay, perfect. No, because this is recorded, so it can be used against me in any occasion.
No, we are talking not about an ethical battle, but about a technological advanced battle.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, the risk is here, and I really don't know how we can force for example, the companies, for example, the American companies, I don't want to say any name, or Chinese companies, to adhere to standards on AI ethics. This is my 2 cents. I'll give the floor to yours if you want to add more.
Please, Masa, sorry.
Yes, no worries. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because now there are massive, powerful companies that are global, but we have lots of local jurisdiction and local regulation. So I think I don't have an answer for how we can work with that tension, but I don't think anyone expected these powerful companies to get as large as they did and as global as they did. So I think moving forward, it would be interesting to see how to manage that tension between the local regulation and jurisdiction with those massive companies.
Connor.
Yes, thank you, Luca. And exactly some seriously interesting points. And what I always like to think about is one of the papers I read for the main newsletter is that there can't be AI ethics without ethics in itself. So AI ethics itself really isn't that kind of vacuum. It can't exist on its own, and it can't just be born out of nothing. So I think when you start looking at the corporate side, I think generating that kind of awareness and that kind of environment where it's okay to speak up, and it's a very interdisciplinary, it's a very sort of receptive environment as well. That's where you can then bring about the AI ethics that governments can then play on in order to regulate properly and get corporate buy-in as well. So it's by generating that kind of awareness, that kind of mentality, that I think a lot of the AI researchers that are now coming through are sort of aware, is that they can then bring that through and into the corporate environment as well. And in that sense, I think an awareness that once, at least on the corporate side, that once you release an AI product, that the constant monitoring is also required. So like with AI ethics, you can't really release a product, tick it off the list, and then just leave it and ignore it. So I think that constant sort of imagining and that kind of dynamism that the space commands, I think is an important aspect towards legislation, as well as being able to tackle these problems.
Thank you. Marta, please.
Yeah, I think this is the most difficult question so far for me. It's very tough. I don't really have like a solution. I just have an attempt to an answer. And I think I could start from one of Masa's point, which I really agree with, to sort of like, she brought up several of the tensions that are present. And for example, one of them being the global with the local. When you go and develop some legislation or even any policy, apart from just hard legislations who aim to be effective in a certain sphere, you want to make sure that they are broad enough so that they're applicable across a wide spectrum of countries, for example, or even actors. However, you want them to be also adaptable to the context. And I think that's one of the tensions already that any legislation on AI ethics or just policy on AI ethics goes and already touches upon. And then there are, from then onwards, so many other tensions that are really difficult to meet, but yet should be kept in mind. And I think some of them, for example, are like a fine balance that should be found between what is independence and enforceability. So, for example, you want a certain law. Let's take the Gdpr as an example, for example. You want a certain law to be able to sort of be upheld by someone such as an independent body, for example, that can check both companies and the government. However, you also want this independent body to have a sort of to have the power to have a voice, which is sometimes almost as strong as the one of the government, for example, or as effective as the one, or as influential, let's say, as the one instead of the private sector. And that's not easy to find. And that's another tough balance when you want to develop a law, a legislation, or even just policy on AI ethics. And I think another one that came to mind is also this balance between strict and flexible. And I think that is, like Gabri brought up the AI Act, and that is another example that I could bring up here. I think the AI Act, it's not yet legislation, so it's just a draft, but one of the main disputes was the definition of AI in the Act. And I think that's the biggest example that we can bring here, or that comes to mind at the moment, is AI is an ever-changing technology. And if you define it in law, and that becomes a sort of like strict definition that goes on to be enforced, that's a very big problem in case AI changes. So you want to find a balance between keeping open that definition, however, then also make it enforceable in a strict way, and not being like, oh yeah, we just put an X there, and then we can just keep on updating the X. But then who updates the X? You know, who has that power? And I think that's very tough. So I think these are tensions, let's say, to keep in mind once we go and develop any law or any policy on AI ethics. But to go and really try to reply to your question, I think the reply that I can think of is to sort of like, we need a criteria, so that policy and what is like soft norms and law that is more like hard norms can play in concert with each other. So we can find a sort of criteria to bring in the hard norms when needed, and yet for them to be complemented by the soft norms when needed. But I don't have that criteria, so I don't really have an answer in that sense. Those are just the things that came to mind.
Yeah, you talk about the GDPR, no? When we talk about the GDPR, we are talking about personal data protection, and we have a problem, I suppose, because the GDPR wasn't created specifically for big data and DI. And many argue that by collecting a sufficient amount of data, one can, through reverse engineering, make GDPR precautions null and void. In fact, for connecting many different data to a single person, revealing the identity previously hidden by the GDPR. So the point is that a real risk, or are they just scaremongering, which can be the solution? So DI can be can transform the GDPR like a void precautions. I don't know if I was clear. So
can you like, is it sort of like, does AI make the GDPR redundant and sort of like not up to date anymore, or is it more specific than that?
No, it's just what you say. So the point is that the GDPR is trying to protect our personal data, but it's not written specifically for the big data or about the AI systems. Okay, so what we can do with a lot amount of data, with a huge amount of data, is to reverse engineering discover who is the identity behind the data. So so this is a preoccupation, this is a worry about some experts. Do you think is a real risk or not? There is a solution about it, or the GDPR is a safer, a real safe law also for this kind of topic? All of you can answer, of course. I don't know if it's just a big questions on the table. It's just something I am curious about it.
Yeah, and while I'm not a GDPR expert, the problem of reverse engineering is sort of a big problem, and it's something that data companies and governments are having to work against. One of the more popular methods, and maybe Gabriele can talk a little about it in terms of the computer science, is differential privacy. So differential privacy is a sort of another sort of very popular method in terms of how that data can be still protected because the machines are not trained on the raw data effectively of people. So when these kind of products are produced, there's sort of the data is slightly perturbed. So there's not if any sort of data pirates came in, or if there was any reverse engineering, you wouldn't actually be able to take out the raw data and actually find out who these people are. So in terms of reverse engineering and GDPR, there are some concerns that reverse engineering is a problem. And I think differential privacy is one of the ways they're trying to combat that as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Anyone else?
I totally agree with what Connor said. So yeah, there is the problem of reverse engineering. It's I think a really big problem, because I'm not an expert on GDPR, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But for example, if you train a machine learning or an artificial intelligence model on some data, the model itself is not protected by the GDPR, but in some cases you can extract information about the training data from the model. So yeah, this is like a caveat in the law, I would say. But yeah, we can solve it with as Connor said, differential privacy is a very good solution for this problem. We can solve it using, for example, generated data. So you use some amount of real data, you train another model to generate similar data, and you use the generated data to train your model. So it's not real people, but they resemble data from real people. Yeah, the solution, we have some solution, but I think this is a really huge problem, and I think that also the models, also the artifacts of machine learning or artificial intelligence can need to be protected by the GDPR as the data, because basically you can reverse engineering them and reobtain the data that it was used to train these models. I see Martha with a raised hand.
Yeah. Martha, please.
I just totally agree with Connor and Gabri, and I was just thinking, so they talked about differential privacy, and I think that's exactly the big elephant in the room here. That's exactly, I think that's it. I think that's one way, at least, in which this could potentially be tackled. There's another thought that is a bit maybe of a sideline that came to mind, that is also potentially thought related to, in fact, reverse engineering. That is often it is tough to draw the line between what count as like data of the individual and data of the group. And I think that also plays into the ability to reverse engineer. So sometimes you might be able to know, said in a very crude, rough way, you might be able to know my preferences by sort of like looking at my friends' preferences. Or you might be able to know where I go by looking at where my partner goes, let's say. Like there's many ways in which you can still get to know data that are private about a certain person by inferring it from the group to which that person belongs to. And I think that's another potential danger that plays into that. And there's something in the literature, and I'm sure probably all of you are familiar with this, maybe the audience as well, like sort of like group privacy as a way to sort of like protect the privacy of the group and not tie the idea of privacy strictly to the one of the individual. And I think that's another potential way, that's something that came to my mind together with what Connor and Gabri also brought up, that could be another good starting point.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah, if I can, I would just to add something about this.
Yeah, you can.
Okay, as I said before, I'm not an expert on GDPR, so this is really a question. It's not something that it's something that I would ask to Martha, Connor, and Masa. So for the GDPR, what is data? Because yeah, of course, if my photographs, my posts on the social media, okay, this is my data and it's protected by the GDPR, I assume. But for example, the likes that I put on my friend's photo are my data, or are the data of the social networks. The page I follow are my data. My friends in Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and so on. this kind of data, it's my data and it's protected by the GDPR, or it's in a sort of limbo and no one knows if it's protected or if it's my data, if it's the social network data, if it's someone data that it's not defined. This is really a question. So if you know, please answer me.
Yeah, I probably think that the second one you're saying. So it's like a dark area probably, because I work on GDPR sometimes, but yeah, you probably centered the point. I don't know if someone want to say something about it, but you centered the point. Probably it's a dark area about.
Yeah, I don't know. I would like, and so I'm coming out of thought and not out of knowledge. Like literally, I'm just thinking that, I mean, whatever is public that everyone can see potentially, like I do not know whether that's as protected as something that would be your own features, like your gender, your race, and protected categories. So it could also be that your like that is out there visible to everyone, depending on what your privacy settings are. So on, let's say, Facebook, for example, it might also be, I'm not sure that that's privacy protected then in that sense, almost as if you gave up at least that part of what could have been your privacy. But of course, then you can, but I really don't know. So I'm just sharing just thoughts, but I don't really know. It's of course, tough question. And you started interviewing the interview, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. This is how this can become a meta roundtable.
Yeah. No, probably the point is interesting because you're talking about data intrinsically linked with the use of social networks. So that's a good point. We probably have we have to go deeper in this, but not now. So don't worry. So we have a question about from the audience about the social network. So I just read it now because it's interesting. So what would you like to see from a regulatory governmental side to be done on a social media level regarding the implementation of AI ethics standard? We saw that we have a huge problem with the social media platform, especially in politics. So what do you think about it? That's a really good question.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, if the others are thinking, I can start on something that I'm basically borrowing rather than that being my idea. But it came up, I think, yesterday in the AI governance day of the conference. And I think it was Nicolas Miai, the president of the Future Society. He said that bringing the example of France, now there's a lot of talks when it comes to algorithms being used in social media. There's a lot of talks about social networks, for example. And he said that if we centered that discourse more around social media, so exactly how that question has been framed, media have been around as a category for much longer, that being TV, that being advertisements and different forms of advertisement. So there are, maybe one way is there is already existing legislation and already existing work that can be translated into, only partly, of course, what are some of the present challenges, and for that we could look into existing legislations then about, you know, I do not know, media and TV ads regulations as well, that is already present. However, of course, and that's probably what the question addresses, is what about what that doesn't cover? And that I'm not really sure. I think there's a way to go about it, which is I think many things are being chosen or are not really being debated, are being brought up. The problem is being brought up only once decisions have already been taken and problems have already sort of started going around in the public. So for example, misinformation, even though Facebook in many ways knew what they were doing, they knew they were experimenting on big part of the population already, for example, with their the example of them doing the voting elections in the US, when they just made a little change where before you would be reminded of voting or of having to vote, and then around that reminder you would also see which ones of your friends already voted, and how that increased the turnout of the US elections. That is something that no one was aware about until Facebook disclosed that that's what they were doing, you know. And of course, this could be taken as an example of Facebook has done great work for democracy, but once Facebook is a platform where a lot of disinformation goes around as well, that sort of help becomes purely one of magnitude. But of course, if what you are actually boosting is an increase of voters, of misinformed voters, that is a very, very ethically problematic sort of stance. And that is, to me, something we didn't know about and we didn't discuss about. And I think even before knowing which law to use, we should start changing. Maybe governments and private companies should start changing the approach to this. We should discuss before having even any sort of proposal for legislation. That's just an idea.
Yeah, I think Marta brings up a really good point, because we need to think of this as an evolution, right? We didn't just get here from nowhere. There's an evolution of what made up media companies. There's an evolution of how AI has been used. And so I think sometimes there's a misconception that we need to scratch everything that's been done and start with a brand new slate because of AI. And I think really it's just that we need to make tweaks, and they're probably going to have to be major tweaks, but we're not starting from scratch. We're working with years of history. And I think we need to look at that first and look at why certain laws were created, how certain companies had to abide by those laws, and maybe now the loopholes that are present because of the fast developments in this field, and how we can actually fix those loopholes or fix the problems that are arising because they didn't exist 10 years ago.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. Connor, Gabriele, can go on, or do you want to add something?
I basically agree with all that that Marta and Masa said. Basically we have I followed the workshop, the keynote speaker by Nicolas Mia yesterday, that is the one that pointed out by Marta. And they say a really interesting thing. So we have law for television, for classical media, I would say, newspaper, television. Why we can't use the same law, or maybe slight modification of this law, and apply them to social media? Maybe it's not too easy, because in social media you are not the content is provided by users, so you're not directly responsible for the content that is posted on your social media. So it's really difficult, but I think we can take inspiration from law about digital media. Just to answer the question, that is what you like to see for a regulatory governmental side to be done. Just my desiderata. I don't know how a government can enforce them, but for me it's transparency. For social media has my data, and they say to me, okay, I use your data to advertise, for advertising, or for suggesting you the product that maybe you like the most. It is okay for you, or you don't agree? Maybe for me it's okay. I agree. You can use my data for this kind of stuff. Now we want to use your data for, I don't know, political or social experiment. Do you agree? And I want the freedom to know, and the freedom to say, no, I don't want that my data will be used for this kind of stuff. But I repeat, I don't know how a government can enforce this kind of behavior to a social network or a social media. It's just my desiderata. And that's all for my part.
Connor, do you want to add something?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what has been said has been fantastic, and the question as well is a really good question. So especially with social media, I think is one of the areas where algorithms and AI's influence are sort of the not as noticed or not as notable as other arenas, effectively, like with the Cambridge Analytica scandal, or with Facebook's use of facial recognition as well, that they've now put to one side and said, no longer going to be able to recognize your face in photos. And I think it's also serves as a good use case. So there's a lot of history behind it, as Massa said, and there's years and years of how we're going to regulate TV and how we're going to regulate newspapers, as Gabriele mentioned. And then now we've got all that history and what to look at, and then we can hopefully apply it to a good use case that is the new sort of main form of communication, which is social media. And a lot of these kinds of things, a lot of comparisons I've seen in the AI ethics space is with bioethics as well, and with medical ethics. So having that sort of established routine practice, and then being able to use that as a model to take forward. So I think social media can be a good use case to use the years of history that we've had with other forms of communication as well, to see how we can regulate the AI that is very clearly being used, but obviously not clearly enough.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that the point is just not about, of course, the social media level, because if we are thinking about the artificial intelligence, the AI is guiding our lives from every part, like, for example, advising us what movies to see, like Netflix, for example, what roads to take. I think about Google Maps and what music to listen to. So when we searching something online, we use Google, we ask Siri, or Alexa, and somehow the search for information is being driven by these algorithms, risking to create a bubble of information. How is it possible to prevent this from happening? Because these are a really big problem. All our information, all our searching for information is guided by algorithms. Because talking seriously, everyone uses Google if they have to search something. So I think that we can just spend some minutes to talk about it.
Yeah, maybe I can start. This is a really, really interesting question, and it's true. I prove this this thing, because we can prove now, if you want. If I search something on Google, probably the result that Google show me are different from the Connor results or Marta results or everyone results, because are based on my past searches, are based on my past behavior and so on. So yeah, there is the risk that yeah, of course, the business model of Google is that they basically want that I click the first results. So it tends to put in the first results, or in the first page, I would say, the link or the website that Google, the AI at Google think that I'm interested in the most. So yeah, there is the risk of being in a bubble. So Google show me only the thing that I like, and not different opinion, thing that maybe I don't like, but maybe I don't know. So yeah, how can we prevent this? How can we prevent this? Well, in my opinion, there isn't a unique solution. Personally, I'm pretty. I know that I'm pretty. Maybe I'm overdoing in this kind of stuff, but I'm setting up my browser to clear all the cookies, browser history, and all the related thing every time I close it. So they basically cannot reconstruct my history every time I reopen the browser. Yeah, of course they can by my address, my IP address, my location, but yeah, just to make the life of Google or any other search engine more difficult. I know that there are some plugins in the browser to produce random traffic. So when you navigate the internet, it in the background, so you don't see anything, but it produces random Google searches just to confuse the search engine, and doesn't let the AI at Google to profile you in a very, very good manner. Yeah, by now I think it's all up to individuals. I don't think there is a regulation about that stops search engines or social media to just show me the thing that they think I like the most. But yeah, it will be totally needed in my opinion, because for example, for I don't know, extremism or radicalization, this is a really, really important important concept. So only see the people that agree with you, only see your group of people can be a mean of radicalization for many people. So it's always so it's not a very good thing that yeah, of course it's a good thing for the social media because you are more engaged, but it's not a very good thing for all the rest of the behavior. I don't know if you want to add something, but
probably just a suggestion. The work you do with your association is a strategy to solve this problem, because if you are democratize the knowledge about the artificial intelligence, you inform the people how artificial intelligence work, people can voluntarily exit from the bubble. It's something not so easy, but you can exit from the bubble. And so one solution is the work you've done every day, probably. This is just a suggestion. Do you want to add something? Masa, probably you unmute yourself. Yeah.
So thank you. That's a great solution, and it's great for May and AI for people. But I think going off of the point that was just made, and I don't know how concrete it would be, but changing the business model, I think that's at the core, because with engagement and with ads, that's what's making these companies their revenue. So I think at the crux of the issue is the fact that their incentive is to get money, and it's through this business model that thrives on collecting the data and giving the ads that will have the best engagement. So yeah, I'm not sure specifically how that would look like, but I think it would be worth exploring in the future. Also, so that the responsibility doesn't fall on the individual users as well. So yeah.
Thank you. Martin, Connor, do you want to add something?
You go ahead, Marta.
Yeah, this one is very tough. I was trying to picture to picture the problem, sort of, that, like, you know, when you are as an agent, as an individual on the internet, let's say, which aspects of control do you have and you don't have, sort of. And I was trying to picture it. I'm going to share my screen for 1 second, because I didn't know how to picture it, like, without it being visual for someone. I still did it very badly, I think. But that you see this, only this. So I was just trying, maybe let's make it big, I don't know, like something like that. Like the fact that, like, so who has control over this? It's still, let's say, the platform, but we don't really know, right, what the platform is, who is behind the platform. And the problem is, like, there's almost 3 levels. There is the level at which the platform, and that I think is at the core, the platform has control over which information we receive. And this means that they also have control over what we know, what we don't know, what is truth for us, what appears as truth for us, and what appears as a lie, and all of that. And then there's, like, another layer that it's a bit more external to that, or is consequential to the information we get, and is the choices that we get to make based on the information we receive. And that's also something that the platform can have control over, because by design, by the design that they design, they have they determine the set of choices that we are presented with, given the info that we have received. And then there is a consequential layer to that, which is, given that we have received the info, given that we have the choices, do we have the sort of, like, the freedom, the will? Are we free in the choices we make? in that. And I think there are 3 layers that is important to distinguish when we go into this discussion, because I think that where that control goes has a huge impact on the sort of like society of how society is going to look like, sort of. Now, I do not know whether the control is over all of this, the control that the platform has is on all of this or just on some. I think we can argue that we have the freedom of making the choices given the set that we are presented with online and given the information that we have. And still, I think this is a very, like, we could have a debate about this because I'm not even sure about that. But I'm pretty sure that by now the platforms have control over the information we receive and the set of choices we receive given that information. So I think that's something that we should try to focus on regulating, because I think that's it gets very dangerous, I think, when both the information we receive and the set of choices that we're allowed to make, when we have no control over that. And I think democratization, following from what you said, is very, very important at that level. The problem is, like, how do you make that more democratic? I think in a way, we, like, users have a right to receive good information, and information that is not a blatant lie. At least I know this is tough to say, but I think then rights do come into play. I do not think it's viable to give everyone control over which information they receive. I think no one wants to spend that time also, and no one will. But I think then it's a matter of rights, or of literally protecting the right to not just information, but also to good information in a way, and to a healthy set of choices. But honestly, this is a huge, a huge sort of door that we open here, because what is a healthy set of choices? So this is just my thoughts that are not going anywhere, but I was just thinking, I don't really have a proper reply to this.
But I think it is interesting also just give the idea of something, because we can use all this point to organize further discussion about it. So I think it's good. Connor, do you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you, Luca. And it's exactly that. I think one of the things about this problem is the echo chamber effect. So when you start basically just getting isolated and getting only exposed to the kind of information that you want, and one thing is that you can be acknowledged that some of the things that that can be included in the information that you want can be interdisciplinary things and can be sort of discussion forums and sort of the like. So if I'm interested in AI ethics and then I want to subscribe to someone like May, I know that I won't just be being exposed to just Western or just Eastern thoughts. I will be exposed to multiple different things. So at least then that the algorithms and search engines will be giving me these kinds of sources. And I think that's where this type of environment in the AI space comes into play, is that there are so many interdisciplinary sort of forums, but also in terms of so many different aspects to this kind of practice, that you are able to just stick to your guns and just say, okay, I'm just going to focus on the philosophy side. But then you can only go so far with sort of thinking about philosophical issues with artificial intelligence. Eventually, I will need to talk to a data scientist to be able to sort of get my thoughts into practice. So I think with these kinds of search engines, they may lead you in terms of the AI space to the content that you want. But I think if you are aware that it's doing that, you'll be able to combat it in different ways.
Thank you very much. Like, yeah, probably everything you say about it is something that concerned the accountability, also the accountability problem. So all this answer is also the answer for the question about how can we make sure algorithms are fair, especially where they are privately owned by corporation, and how can we balance openness and intellectual properties about the development of AI? So probably the answer are similar to this question, but we talk about the civilian society. Just let me put a question about not civilian society, but the military society. So like something more complicated. But when we talk about artificial intelligence, very often come to mind the 3 laws of robotics of Asimov. The first law says that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A nice concept, but one that we know full well is not true. Armies already use drones that don't have to be found directly by humans and can boast artificial intelligence. So the question is, on what basis should we ban those types of weapon? And if we do ban these, how can we ensure that this doesn't drive an alternative underground research? Yeah, I know. That's a very big question. But yeah, I'm interested in what do you think as an expert about it?
Yeah, and it's something that's come up in my research as well with anthropomorphism, and it's especially when it comes to talking about the overblown expectations to do with AI. So we talk about how a part of the sort of technologization of society is that you start trusting and start sort of putting your interest in these technologies to a very large extent. So if for example, my Apple Watch tells me that my heartbeat is a certain amount, I'm going to very much believe it that it's that rate. And I always see it with my granny and my grandma, is that if technology says this, then it's pretty much that. And I find that it very much in the AI ethics space as well, and in the military space. And in my research, I came across an example in military space in 2003 in Kuwait. And what happened was that a British jet was coming into a US allied airbase. The system misidentified it as an enemy, threw up all the alarm signals, and then the two basically the 2 officers there in a human in the loop system, which is where an AI like can operate sort of on its own, but a human can basically observe that it's doing that and can interrupt at any time. Effectively, they saw that and they said, "Oh no, it's fine." And then the jet was shot down and 2 pilots were killed. So I think when we talk about sort of the military space, I think the anthropomorphic side is a very interesting way to look at it. And especially when we start thinking about, okay, why should we carry on digitalizing warfare in that way? So why why should it be a question where we say we ought to do that? So why do we need to produce these sort of solo flying drones? You can talk about how it saves sort of being focused on a very sort of heavy task for the whole time. So it saves resources and that kind of thing. But when we talk about the ought and why are we ought to do this, is there actually a deep-seated reason why we should digitalize in that sense? This is where sort of the campaign for killer robots comes from. And then this is sort of where the dangers of this kind of warfare becoming out of control and becoming an arms race sort of comes into the debate as well. So I think when we think about AI and warfare, it's sort of a question is about how far do we take it? And what are the consequences of doing that and whether we should actually do that in the first place.
Thank you. You're precisely clear about it. Thank you. Someone else?
Yeah, I can add to that. I totally agree with Connor's point. I think he had made such a good point that it's, I really think, I mean, I do not know if I can call myself an ethicist, but as anyone around that sort, I think there should be, of course, an outright ban. But of course, on killer robots. But of course, if I go and say that in front of, I do not know, a political stage, many political actors will laugh at my face and will say that I'm just a dreamer, or I do not understand how geopolitics works. And thing is, of course, I understand you put a ban in Europe and they develop autonomous weapons somewhere else. That you're not solving the problem in that way. I do think, however, that there is a certain responsibility in politics at a very high level to act very early on. Like now it's already almost too late. You know, we see already killer robots and autonomous drones already being used in combat, and that is, it's not banned I mean, it is being used anyway. So I do think that here, that's when very, very large international general bodies should really use their power in order to make clear that no matter where, no matter what, no matter when, there should be an outright ban on this. And I mean, like, of course, if one state says that, it's going to be useless. If two states say that, it's going to be useless. But I think a sort of like an international regulation that uses potentially what is the image of countries and the international image of countries in order to bind them. I know that it's not going to be able to be a law, most probably, but let's say there is, I think, pretty much all over the world, in terms of, from the citizens' perspective, quite an outright disgust and rejection of what are killer robots and autonomous weapons. So you could use really international pressure as a weapon then to bargain against that. But of course, I know my answer remains naive, but I'm really tough on this point. I really think it's where there is no debate that that's clearly ethically wrong. But yeah, it's tough.
Thank you very much. Gabriele, please.
Yeah, just to add something that more about the amazing answer by Connor and Mark, which I totally agree. You cited the Asimov law, no, so a robot cannot harm any human. I would say an artificial intelligence cannot harm any human. Yeah, I would put the point on what is harm. So if a drone, if it bomb my house and kill me, of course it harm me. So it has to be banned. But at the same time, I don't know, a recommended system that negate me money for buying my house because I'm a people of color. It's doing harm to me, or it's considered the same harm of a robot that bomb houses. It's a different kind of harm. We have to ban killer robots, but not banning this recommended system. We should ban it all. Yeah, I think these are very, very delicate questions. Of course, I'm not saying that I don't want to ban killer robots. I think they should be banned. But yeah, I think that we should define what is harm in this sense, no? What is what it means to cause harm, what it means to be unethical, in order to not do a law to ban something, and after some time another law to ban something else, another law to ban something else. So I think we should cover all the concept of harm in a unified legal framework. And just to conclude, how killer robots, can be banned. Yeah, it's true that if something can be used by the military, they will use it. I would say, and I'm skeptical that the research about AI using in weapons will be stopped. But I really agree on Mark about the social and the people pressure on politics. We see it many times in the past. So if people really are really educated on the subject, and people are really organized, and they really don't want that something is used, I think this is the best and the only working option that we have. So I would say educate people, let the people know that we are using AI to kill people in war zones, and try to form a movement as the movement against killer robots, against this kind of use of AI in order to do pressure to the politician in order to intervene in some way. For me, it's the only option that we have. So educate people, and it's a bottom-up approach, I would say. So it has to come from the people and not from the politician, unfortunately.
Thank you. Masa, do you want to add something?
I think
No?
they covered every thought that popped into my head.
Of course, yeah. I just say
Luca,
something.
Can I add
Yeah,
something super quick?
of course.
It's linked to something that Gabby said, and you made me think about like the wider concept of harm. No? And I was thinking because recently I've been doing some work on the AI Act, and the fact that like what they like they sort of try to solve that problem of going transversally across sectors to define harm in terms of like framing harm in terms of risk. Very poorly said, but like they base a risk, they use a risk approach, as we saw also together, Gabri. And in a way, there is one way in which they tried to tackle the point of harm, where it's about manipulation, for example. And I think that's very relevant for what you said about recommender system. And as you said, that type of harm is super difficult to define. Like when you go and read in the AI Act, I just pulled it up because it's a phrase that is worth to be said. See how difficult it is for them, and I understand them, to explain what constitutes harm in that case. And it would be like, it's one of the prohibited practices to regulate manipulation. And it says that what's prohibited is the placing on the market, putting into service or use of an AI system that deploys subliminal techniques beyond a person's consciousness in order to materially distort a person's behavior in a manner that causes or is likely to cause that person or another person physical or psychological harm. You see that like the level of complexity here is just too high. There's consciousness in there. It's a law. Like it is so tough. And I mean, I wish them the best because I think it's super tough, really, but it is, look at that. It's, how do you put this into law? It's insane.
Yeah, it's very complicated. It's very deeper question. Yeah, I want to say something provocative to close this topic, but like something that probably have to say on the table. But every killing robots used in war saves actually a life by the army using it. So we are in the full utilitarian philosophy, but that's another question and another point of view. No, I can use robots, not people. The war, we can stop war, but I can use robots instead of people. So that's something on which we have to reflect about it. But our time is very, we cannot spend a lot of time about it. So another question that will likely stay on the table and our audience will take home is a common thread through all these questions. Who is responsible for establishing and enforcing the ethical standard for artificial intelligence system, and who is responsible if these systems fail? This is a generic question. We try to answer to this question during our roundtable. So yeah, we come to the end to this debate. Absolutely great. But before leaving us to rapid question, you have to answer briefly. What are your plans, of course, as an association in the field of artificial intelligence for the coming year? And if you had to summarize in a sentence or so the most important message you want to leave to the audience, what will it be?
I mean, I can go very quickly then in terms of plans. We are developing now the high-risk repository on AI, and that's a very like just concrete sort of example rather than very general. Even though, I mean, it is still very general in terms of it will be a repository that aims to sort of create a base for anyone from researchers to also just people, like literally citizens curious about what's happening outside there in terms of ethics, to start from either informing themselves, or even just if you're a researcher and you didn't know that that was going on in a certain part of the world, that a certain high-risk AI application was being used, you can also use it as a case study, for example. So in a way, bringing up knowledge, creating awareness, a bit also this gets linked to the literacy point that Connor and Maza brought up at the very beginning, that the Montreal AI Ethics Institute is concerned with. So that's a very just like concrete point. More in general, I think I really hope to continue this sort of effort, which is also embedded in this conference, to bring together academics as well as people. Because I once was attending a conference when someone said that ethics should be treated as as strict terms as a subject like math or philosophy or anything else, where we should learn what certain concepts are. But I do not agree with this. I think ethics, especially within the revolving field of artificial intelligence, is something that should instead start from the will of the public, if not in this case, where else, you know? So I do think that for us, and I don't want to talk for Gabri as well, you can add something, but for us, really, the aim is to sort of bring those two together.
Yeah, Gabriele, you want to?
Oh, okay,
please,
yeah.
You can finish, and so we'll let the floor to the.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. I quote everything Marta said about the next moves, I would say, for AI for people. So we have this repository. We hope to organize the second edition of this conference next year. So we have many projects in this sense. And just to conclude, I think one of the best things that everyone can do is just spread the knowledge about AI ethics. Talk to your friends, talk to your parents, talk to your family about this problem. Just make people know, because if people know, they can act. Yeah. Of course, if people don't know, that they can't act. Of course, this seems a very trivial quote, but I think it's really important to just let people know that there is this problem, and we can solve it together. So as I said before, it's really I think the solution will come from the people, not from the government. So just educate people, just talk, just spread all these ideas around, and let's hope we will fix not all the problem, because it's impossible, I think, but many of the problems, maybe the most important one.
Thank you. Connor and Masa, so what are your plans and the most important message?
Yes, I'll kick it off, and then I'll hand over to Masa. And so for us, we've got our quarterly State of AI Ethics report coming out very soon. So that'll be in the sort of first 2 weeks of December. That's got all sorts of like lovely content, and basically summarizing what we have done over the past quarter and all the latest and greatest stuff that has come up as a result. We've also got lots of events coming up. So we've got an event in December as well. So you've got our panel discussion on value-sensitive design, which will be fantastic, which you can find on our website as well. And that includes various panelists that are serious experts in the field, and that'll be a fantastic discussion that you can all tune into, learn together. And that's what I want to leave the sort of conversation from my part today, is just to say, get involved in the debate, like Marta and Gabriele have talked about, is get involved. And your opinion really does matter. Your experience is unique to you, and your experience is something that will involve and inform your opinion that you'll be able to take to the debate, and that some of us will never have thought before. So I think getting involved and sharing that seriously important experience that influences your opinion on the debate is the best way to take this area forward.
Thank you.
Yes, and as Connor said, we're just trying to build even stronger communities with our meetups and events, and continue creating content that hopefully people find useful. And I'd encourage everyone to just stay curious. I know oftentimes it can seem very doom and gloom with these areas. It's very complex, and there are some tough questions, but that also means that there is the potential for creative solutions. So continue reading, continue staying curious, talking to people, exchanging ideas. And I'm very excited to see what the future holds.
Thank you. So sorry for the late finish. Thank you for joining us. It was my honor to moderate this roundtable. Hope you had a great time, and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Luke, as well.